This is the best way to play Cassidy in Overwatch 2. Cassidy is great at holding medium range sightlines with his Peacekeeper, using his flashbang to threaten flankers like Genji or Tracer from getting on top of him, as well as having a role he can use defensively. Against highly static comps with a ton of poke damage, don't be afraid to hard flank, but you should always be looking for soft flanks and angles you can take throughout the fight to surprise the enemy team. The worst thing you can do is sit main with your Peacekeeper. Cassidy's weapon, the 6-shooter, makes Cassidy shoot bullets, dealing 70 damage every half a second with fall off starting at 25 meters. You can also fan the hammer to unload the remaining bullets in your clip very quickly, but these bullets only deal 50 damage. I'll quickly cover fan the hammer before going on to your main firing mode. Fan the hammer is pretty much useless now in Overwatch 2, since you often used it to finish off a target in close range after you flashbang them. But now, since your flashbang is, well, no longer a flashbang, you'll only be fanning the hammer in niche situations when an immobile target is right up close to you. Like maybe a Winston after he uses jump and is chasing you, for example. That's it. Moving on to your primary fire, the biggest thing to keep note of is the sightlines you choose to play. As of recording, Cassidy recently received a, on paper, slight range buff, which in game actually translates to a 20% or more time to kill decrease. A very common thing I see lower level Cassidy players do is that once they have a nice sightline or angle, they will walk forward to whatever they're shooting instead of using the cover they once had and jiggle peek from it. You're dealing the same damage whilst being much safer. Now as Cassidy, you will outrange most heroes and compositions, so the most important thing to do is to maximize your range and safety, even at the expense of a little bit of fall off.
If you're going to take this angle here, why are you pressing W? Why did you go from nice corner, nice angle here to I'm on top of point? Maintain the sight line, and that's all you need to do. You outrange this comp heavily outside of Zenyatta and random Pharaoh rockets. There is no reason for you to go, I'm going to close the distance against these guys whatsoever, especially with the diva on the field. You're playing your McCree like you're trying to get up in the face of your enemies. At least that's how it looked like on the Pharah, and it's how it looked like in the diva. You do not need to do that. You can do that against Widowmaker comms, Hanzo comms.
Now, likewise to heroes like Ashe, there are times where you need to be playing a shorter range and, no surprise, that's up against sniper comps. A visual example of this would be on Junkertown First Point Attack, where you can play shorter sightlines in the run with the Mega, while still having an off angle to split focus. You may even want to 2-tap the Widowmaker while she's scoped in. On Soccer Royale, this could also be taking an angle underneath the high ground, or rotating to it and directly contesting the high ground. Also, as obvious as it is really important that you time all the angles you take with when your core pushes. I'll mention more about angles and flanking on Cassidy in the last section of the guides. Cassidy's first ability, the Rick Roll, makes Cassidy perform a combat roll in the direction you're walking in with a 6-second cooldown and a 50% damage reduction whilst rolling. The main usage of roll is for defensive purposes, to maintain an angle and to defend yourself from any threats, as Spallo explains here.
Hi guys, I'm a Major Midget Guide. Really, roll and flash are both used when your off angle is being contested. In other words, you can either utilize roll flash aggressively on your off angle, but most of the time you want to find a good off angle that makes you really, really dangerous, that makes people want to come after you, and then you can use roll and flash to defend yourself. That's the goal. That's the goal. Very rarely will you aggressively be looking for roll and flash opportunities. Oftentimes you'll just take a position that makes the enemy team do something to stop you, and that's where roll and flash are really useful.
Now, of course, there will be times when you aggressively roll to an angle to save time when you try and get to an angle. Maybe you're doing a late or a long flank and you need to hustle and move so you get to that flank in time. There's also using roll to peek a corner fast and to throw off the enemy. I go over open space and corner theory in my Ashe guide, so I don't want to repeat it here, but in short, the person playing the corner has the advantage in choosing when the duel occurs, and the person in open space, or playing away from the corner, has the advantage in the actual duel. This is because the person in open space only has to put their crosshair on the corner, whereas the person on the corner doesn't have that luxury. However, if you're the person on the corner, you can use your roll aggressively to throw off the crosshair placement of the enemy, whilst also utilising that 50% damage reduction. Speaking of that damage reduction, whilst niche, it can actually be quite helpful. Take this example here, whilst I'm dueling the enemy Cassidy. Even though I roll aggressively whilst I'm low HP, I know that if he shoots me, the bullet will deal half damage, whilst I finish him off with my full damage bullets. Unfortunately for him, he rolls a bit too far, so he doesn't get the shot off anyways, but the point still stands. There's also using roll to mitigate against ultimates like Pulse Bomb. You get stuck, no worries, just roll and you'll survive. Make sure to not roll into your team though. Cassidy's second ability, more annoying than Overwatch 1 Flashbang, makes Cassidy throw a magnetic grenade dealing 131 damage with a 10 meter range, a 10-second cooldown, and 1.2 seconds to explode. It also has a fair amount of auto lock on. Likewise to your role, your mag grenade is often used defensively when covering your flanks on an off angle so that you don't get run over. Flashbang isn't often something you actively look to get value from, but rather something to prolong the value you get from your Peacekeeper. Just by you having it, you threaten flankers like Tracer, Sombra or Genji from dueling you up close. With that being said, if you do see an opportunity to aggressively roll in and stick someone, take it.
But I see this here, and I'm a crappy Cassidy, but what should you do literally right now? Immediately.
Probably go for it and stick you.
Roll sticky. Right now. She needs to have, her head needs to be, like, this is so stupid of her. She's playing literally at this range with no charge, with you, with roll and sticky. Holy crap, mate. Get in there.
Just like that clip, there will be times where you'll see someone take an off angle by themselves, and you can just completely deny that. If, on Route 66 for example, a soldier decides to take the lorry, you can completely deny that with 1 or 2 body shots, coupled with your mag grenade that does the rest of the work for you. That soldier either needs his other support, or has to play a lot more carefully just because of your nades. Cassidy's ultimate, buggy as hell, makes Cassidy charge up a shot for every enemy in his LOS. The damage scales exponentially and are broken into 2 zones of 130 and 260 DPS gained for when the high noon is locked onto a target. You also gain a 40% damage reduction whilst high nooning. Starting off with a bit of micro, and after doing a bit of math, Cassidy will be able to one-shot a 200 HP squishy after 1.54 seconds of holding your high noon up. This is actually a slight nerf of 0.1 seconds since my previous Cassidy guide from 2 years ago. Thankfully, to make things simple, there's 3 main uses of high noon, all of which are relatively easy to remember. The first and safest use of high noon is to zone space. I've already talked about using some other ultimates like BAP's window or Bastion's artillery to zone space so your team can push up, and you can do the exact same thing on Cassidy. Here's Nata giving a great example of that still applies today, way back in 6v6.
But if Oni got high noons, that forces enemy team to back up. That forces these guys to, like, you know, back up. It forces these guys to sort of like back up in essence, right? So there's less pressure on Dans, which then means, guess what? Hey, there's less pressure on Dans. Okay, cool. As you know, Diva, Lucio, BAP, even May to some extent, you don't need to be stacked on the REIN right now. You can do something else. And what's it something you can do? You know that the enemy team is abusing these high grounds, right? Like this high ground over here, this high ground over here. You can send a little kill squad to go push that. You'll see the Diva, you'll see the Lucio, and the BAP. All together as a little high ground, little kill squad. They're ready to fight, right? And they'll push that high ground and they'll catch Valentine there who's trying to go for an off angle. You can use ultimates like McCree ult or even Square to force pressure off your Reinhardt and then have your little kill squad go pressure people on the sides.
Here's another great example on Hollywood Seconds. There's a ton of high ground that you can zone, and any teammates you have with vertical mobility, like a Genji for example, can take that high ground. Not to mention, if a Widowmaker decides to dome you with a fully charged headshot from afar, you'll still be alive thanks to the 40% damage reduction. The second use of High Noon is to use it late and on a flank during the mid-fight, similar to something like Reaper's Death Blossom. This is because the enemy team will have already used a bunch of cooldowns that lowers the lethality of your High Noon or straight up stun it, like Diva Matrix, Zarya Bubble, Honor Sleep, and others, hence your High Noon is more likely to land kills. You also do it on a flank since your team will be baiting attention on the front line to allow you to get away with these aggressive flanks. A visual example of this could be on Dorado's second point attack, where your team clears and takes high ground, but you split to the opposite side and catch the enemy team when they retreat. Another use of High Noon linked to this is to proactively High Noon early. This would be a hyper aggressive play to catch the enemy team off guard, but your team needs to match this aggression, as Sparlow explains here.
It should be this: speedily punches from Hotel, Reiner can pin or aggressively take space on main, Ultraviolet can window back, and OG and False need to be on statue, peeling this off right here, helping this guy. This is a train wreck. Look at Reiner, he's just shielding. They're shielding AFK back here. And Wub is just going in. This is a serious disconnect. This kind of play is obviously hyper aggressive and could be considered a feed, but it would work if it got proper support. It's not getting proper support right now.
So, especially in team environments, if you're ever planning to do this, it needs to be said beforehand. And the last use of High Noon is to counter or neutralize aggression from the enemy team. Most commonly, that will be a Sojourn Overclock, a Genji Blade, a Sigma Flux, etc. Moving on to the positioning, playstyle, and composition section of the guides. If you're a regular viewer of mine, you'll know about the 4 key positional guidelines that I keep hammering on about. So let's be quick, and I'll use this example on Junkertown first point defense. Firstly, have cover or a corner to prolong your pressure, as Barlow explains here.
It's general survivability. Now, if we chain off of that, you being able to survive and being able to survive longer because you have cover, what does that mean for the enemy team? How long are you able to hold an angle when you have cover? Longer. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's important because especially in higher ranks, when people are actually paying attention to what's going on around them, there's psychological pressure. There's distraction of, oh, somebody's on an angle, somebody's on a flank. So like if you can maintain pressure there longer because you're using cover and jiggle peeking, it's like a Widowmaker. You know there's a Widowmaker in your backline or a hog in your backline, and it's torture. Like if you can't see them and they're just jiggle peeking and then they grab a health pack and you're like, it's really unsettling.
Secondly, have line of sight onto the enemy team. Obviously, you want to see the enemies so you can shoot them. Thirdly, have good distance from angles so that the enemy BRAWL or tracer or any flanker for that matter doesn't sneak up on you. And lastly, have rotation options, both aggressive and defensive. This can provide you with another angle for when your team engages and you can push up, or a route of retreat if you've lost the fight. Thankfully, on this example, there's a soft flank or an off angle up to the high ground that you can take, or a hard flank all the way around the left sides. Now here's where it gets a bit complicated. Which rotation or option do you take? Do you take the off angle or do you take the full flank? Well, before I answer that question, we need to cover the basics. No matter whether you go for the biggest Narnia flank in existence or you take a small off angle, it needs to be synchronized with your team, as I give an example of here, where my Cassidy and Reinhardt are desynced.
You see here, soon as Ocean's flank is bubbled, where's the angle? McCree should be here. Where's McCree? Completely desynced. Completely desynced. And if McCree was here, look how much attention the Reinhardt is baiting. All 6 players are looking at the Reinhardt right now. If Reinhardt goes in, fire strikes. Again, where's the angle? Now Ocean stand backs out, and now Kree and May push in. Desynced. And now May and Kree disengage, and now Reinhardt goes in.
Now talking about hard flanking. Hard flanking is best against poke brawl comps, or in other words, compositions that lack both mobility and range. Think against the Reinhardt comps as a good example, and Ramattra and Orisa will also fall under that category to a lesser extent.
The reason why it's important to clarify this in the Brawl mirror, one of the limitations of Brawl is if it's very slow. Even with Lucio, if I see McCree like up here, like who on Brawl can really stop that? Bap can shoot it a little bit, their McCree can shoot a little bit, but nobody can like reach it and stop it or deny the angle. There's no Ball, there's no Tracer, there's no Diva, there's no Monkey, there's not even a sniper that can deny that long angle. So for you, I'm not necessarily recommending that you do that, but I am giving you that option that it does work. But the thing is you have to time them very well. Your team has to be in a position to push, because even if you don't kill anybody, you want to get value out of the attention that you buy, and if you do it by yourself, you're just gonna feed, or you're gonna eat a ton of damage, and then you're gonna have to run back to your team and you'll have accomplished nothing. It's a legitimate playstyle. It's a little memey, and there's ways of countering it, but you're not gonna find teams that are gonna be consistent at countering this until you get to Overwatch League, and even then, not even really.
Against comps that do have some vertical mobility, but not too much, you can still hard flank, but just do it later into the team fight, where there's more distractions and more cooldowns are being used. Now, what about dive? Well, I don't recommend you hard flank, since if you're isolated, you're gonna get split and dove. Instead, find a good balance between stacking on your backline and completely isolating yourself, or in other words, utilize off angles.
You don't want to position on top of the team because it allows the enemy team to be able to dive you without taking damage, because there's only one LOS where you're actually putting damage. Like we could draw a straight line of where this damage is coming from, and it's here. They can hide from this damage in here, they can hide from the damage here, they can hide from the damage here, they can hide from the damage here. Whereas if you position just slightly here, not too much, where you can still be Harmony Orbed, Armor Pack, you can poke this pre-jump, this pre-jump, this pre-jump, this no longer has cover, this no longer has cover, this has significantly less cover, this has significantly less cover, and you can even peek down this hallway a little bit easier. Dive wants to corral you. Stacking against dive is not the answer. It is being in positions where you can peel for each other, but you can poke out dive before the fight happens. So you don't want to be isolated, but you don't want to be stacked.
Other things to mention is that you and your backline should rotate when your dive crew engages. Since you don't have a shield in dive, you should rotate once your Winston, Doomfist or Wrecking Ball dive in, as they'll be baiting attention on the front line to allow you to rotate. A visual example of this could be on Route CT6, where your dive tank dives the gas station, and whilst that happens, you peek the angle on the high ground. This way, you have good positioning and good timing with your team. If you're playing a bit closer, you could even stand on carts and then get onto the gas station and then peek whilst your tank engages. Now lastly, onto poke. The most important aspect here is not only to place shorter sightlines, but to also ensure you have an angle as well. A visual example of this would be on Blizzard World First, where even though you have a short sightline, you don't have an angle. In this case, you should soft flank right side to where you have both a short sightline alongside an off angle. A Brigitte can also come with you in order to increase the duration and lethality of your off angle. Hard flanking is also more viable here due to the lack of mobility, but some poke teams will like running Tracer for this very reason. It's why, back in Overwatch 1, some if not most double shield teams ran Tracer, so do be a bit cautious. Well, that's it for the guide. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and if this video helped to raise your IQ, be sure to share it with your friends to also raise theirs. Until next time.